Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. And so today we have a special guest with us. We have Jonathan Sheffield. So I know a lot of you have been waiting in anticipation in front of your computers for weeks and weeks for this moment to arrive, but it's finally arrived. And so I'll just quickly just go through a few things that are coming up on the channel before I introduce Jonathan. So we have next week I'll be in Sydney, so I'll probably won't be doing too much on the weekend. But then I'm going to be involved with Mike Holner and Mike Ferrando. They've invited me onto their channel to talk about 1 John 5:7. Now, we've organised a TurretinFan Peter Van Cleek debate to be on this channel, so that's coming up. TurretinFan wants to debate myself on Revelation 16:5, so that's coming up as well on this channel. And myself and James Snap Jr. are going to be talking about some minority readings in the Textus Receptus. And so I just thought I'd throw that out there that if anyone is interested in that type of thing, hang around the channel. We're going to be talking about all that. And so we have Jonathan Sheffield. So if you don't know who Jonathan Sheffield is, he created a new genre in Christian apologetics by putting 2D, 3D animations onto YouTube, defending how we got the text. So you might remember some videos going around showing James White, Dan Wallace, and Bart Ehrman all sort of in some church somewhere having a discussion or meeting with a ghost or something like that. And so that was Jonathan. And so maybe, Jonathan, you can introduce yourself, tell our audience about yourself, your home life, your family, and all that sort of stuff.
Okay, well, thank you, Nick, for having me on here. I'm very excited about this opportunity. Well, yes, my name is Jonathan Sheffield, born in Brooklyn, New York. Left New York when I was 19 to join the Air Force before settling down in Texas after my 4-year contract. And I think now, after so many years, we have 5 kids, a beautiful wife. I have my dad, James Sheffield, who lives with me. And, I think starting in 2016, we sort of began our journey into Christian apologetics. And I think over the last several years, I've had the opportunity to sit down with the likes of Dr. Ehrman, Dr. Richard Carrier, Dr. Josh Bowman, and others in the field to defend my thesis on how we got the books and the text of the New Testament. So that's a little bit about me.
No, that's great. And your dad is frequently posting little comments on YouTube and Facebook all around the world. And what's your dad's name again?
James William Sheffield III.
James William Sheffield III. Okay, so yeah, oftentimes I'll do a YouTube video and then like a week later I'll get a little comment, but usually it's gold. He has a way of getting a large topic and putting it into a nice little saying. And so I guess he's been a huge influence on your life in this area.
Yes. So from a very early in my childhood growing up, my dad has, deeply influenced me, in a number of his biblical positions. But I think from very early on, he's taught me to sort of be a little bit more independent in my thinking. He has studied for years, especially on the subject of the Bible. So he's kind of introduced me to a lot of the main focus areas in textual criticism. So, as a 9-year-old, you're not real interested in textual criticism or manuscripts. I can tell you the first time I heard the word Vatican mechanics come up in as a 9-year-old kid who's interested in Transformers and playing sports, uh, hearing these terms from very early on. So, you know, having studied with them for all these years, and I think the great thing about my dad is he's been able to actually sift through uh, a large amount of information that he was able to digest, and then sort of piecemeal or provide a better direction based on his studies, where I need to follow down in the sense that I didn't have to read some of the garbage or some of that stuff out there. He kind of put together a really good curriculum. And I think very early on, I think in my early 20s, after I got out of the Air Force, we were looking at possibly setting up what we've done nowadays back then. But with my mom getting sick, and we had to focus a lot of time and attention on her. It wasn't until my mom passed away in 2017 or 2016. So if you think about it, after 42 years of marriage to my mom, we had the opportunity to bring my dad in under our household, get to be with his son and his grandkids, watch him grow up. And I knew the love that he had for mom, and his lifelong pursuit of this question of the received text of the churches. This would be an opportunity to say, hey, I know mom moved on, but we have an opportunity here to take everything that we've studied over the journey of 20 years and get our voice out there in the community to really kind of articulate our position, to kind of defend the received text of the churches.
Okay, and so being influenced by your dad, what was your education like? Were you like homeschooled, or did you just go to a public school or private school? Or
Yes, so I went to a public school in the American sense. So I got to participate in a traditional public education. My dad's background was in statistics and computer programming, so I have picked up a lot of that in my background very early on. And so, after I left to join the military, I continued sort of my college education sort of in that sphere, where I received my undergraduate um, in accounting with a lot of statistics and programming in there, and then I went on to finally receive my my MBA. But I've had a big lot of years and experience in programming. I actually oversee a large data analytics team and operations team. So, data science, programming and development, coding is all in my wheelhouse. So, I know a lot of times education comes up. So I have a traditional through very much the same a rigorous program in studying and research, which I've applied to my independent study, especially around the canon and the text of the New Testament.
No, that's great. That's great. And so I might just read out some of the debates that you've been involved with. So you debated Bart Ehrman, and you've also debated on the book of Exodus, the book of Daniel, Matthean priority, apostolic succession, who wrote the four gospels, and then you've debated Richard Carrier on the last 12 verses of Mark. Shouldn't the Romans have falsified the resurrection of Jesus, and mysterious destiny of the Jews, and the historicity of the books of Daniel and Isaiah? It's a lot of different topics. that's really really great. And so I've noticed in your debates that you are a really nice guy. You come across as one of the nicest guys in the Textus Receptus community. So when are you going to become a jerk for Jesus, or King James ugly, we call it?
I've had a number of scholars reach out to me, and even in organizing, yes, I do have. I'll try not to move too much, but yes, I do have a background screen here.
Oh, that's
I
okay.
saw that. But you know, I've had the opportunity to really sit down because if you think about a lot of these debates, it's really behind the scenes. It's about why I believe the things that I do, and in a lot of cases, we know we're not going to change too many minds, especially on the other side. So I, I've been complimented a lot on my demeanor, on my approach. I don't play gotcha or trying to look for some key moments to embarrass the other person on the other side of the aisle. It's here to actually convey my argument. And
Mm.
my approach from the beginning is to advocate for our positions. And if I can help everyone understand why I believe and why I come to the positions that I do with the evidence that I've portrayed, uh, that's a way we've been able to be effective in creating our voice for these positions. So, um, you know, going into those positions, going into debate from that perspective has been great. I know Matt Dillahunty, he's had a lot of difficult discussions with a number of apologists in the Christian community, which he felt like kind of attacked his character and who he was. So it was an enjoyable experience for him to sit down with myself and actually have a genuine discussion about the issues. And I've gotten that with a lot of people in the academic community, and this is why they've part of the reason they've given me the opportunity to sit down and discuss with them because they also feel like they're not going to be attacked or demeaned, or I'm not out to embarrass them. But they know I'm going to come with a very strong argument. I am going to push them and ask some difficult questions, but everything's done in a respectable way.
Mm. Yeah, because I noticed that, like, most of us guys in the KJV community, we're sort of pushing back really hard. And we've got our swords out and we're sort of just chopping everything that's in front of us. But I noticed that even the guys like, I think it's Myth Vision, he was like,
Yeah, Derek on Myth Vision podcast.
yeah, so he's like, oh, Jonathan Sheffield is a great guy. We have dinner together and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, wow, you're really sort of reaching out into that community with your kindness, with your friendship, and and I've heard that quite a lot with a lot of the guys who you've debated, because some of the debates that we've had in the past with people have ended up sort of being a knife fight, a New York style knife fight. um and it's sort of like it's left a bad taste in everyone's mouth, but you seem to be coming out of these things going, well, I've made some really good friends here.
Yeah, and I think it kind of bodes well to the Christian image, in the sense that we want to go out and do the good confession, and present ourselves well, even for those that obviously don't believe as we do. And my demeanor, even though growing up in Brooklyn, New York, you would naturally think I'd be coming pretty aggressive. This has always been my personality. I think my wife a few weeks ago said, "I never saw you as combative," so it's been part of my personality as well. Though there are times, things are a little different, but for the most part, I have a very even-tempered approach. And because I'm going into these discussions for the right reasons, and I never try to embarrass the person I'm sitting across, it's really about giving a good confession and making my argument, given an opportunity to share my thesis and why I believe the things that I do. So
Mm.
I think going in there with that intention kind of sets the tone that if I'm not here to embarrass you. I'm trying to get out my argument, and I
Mm.
really like doing it on their turf because I'm able to reach others on the other side of the aisle to at least critically think and examine the positions that I'm laying out to them.
No, that's very good. And so, where do you fall on the pigeonholing of being a TRKJV guy? Are you Textus Receptus only, King James only, ecclesiastical text only, a confessional bibliologist, or a Ruckmanite, or a Riplingerite, or a Gippite, or a something else? Where
Yeah.
would you fall in that?
Yeah, well, I know when I first started making my videos, I obviously wanted to advocate an ecclesiastical text position. And the purpose of that is to understand that, you know, um, our position, at least at the ground level, from a foundational standpoint, is we're not against text criticism, because um, it's always been part of our it's always been part of the church, and so the basis for any investigation begins with the church, and we understand that uh, the history of our churches are well divided, between the east and west, and we have a number of guardians and witnesses to the textual tradition, and we need to understand that there's in the east we have the Greeks, we have our Western Church, we have our Aramaic brothers, and we are all lines of successions back to the apostles in the sense that our church does go all the way back. We do have a physical connection to the ancient church, and I always felt that the beginning of any investigation into um, the received text begins with those church texts.
Mm.
Now, what I've always um, found about the work of the Reformation is in the fact that they understood these ancient textual traditions, the Greek and the Latin predominantly, not to mention, the Aramaic textual tradition as well. And they too were trying to understand and reconcile the differences between the Greek and Latin textual traditions. When Lorenzo Valla did his study of five Latin Vulgates and five Greek texts, this really influenced the work of Erasmus and Cardinal Jimenez to begin their own investigations. And what I found is, when we look at the TR position, the TR is basically an answer to how do we reconcile the differences between the Greek, Latin, and Aramaic textual traditions. And what we've had over what started with Valla, Erasmus, and Cardinal Jimenez is this explosion of scholarship that influenced all of Europe to kind of take the mantle and lead and build upon the scholarship that they started building the basis on. And we see Theodore Bieza, we see Stephanus, and then we see the work of William Tyndale, and then later, the committee of, the Church of England finally coming with the final product. So when we look at my position, obviously, I respect the ancient tradition, uh, the works of Jerome and the Greek Orthodox Church in 1904 and the Aramaic text. But when we get to the TR, I feel best addresses the differences between the Greek and Latin churches. And to kind of tie that all up, the King James, they had all that scholarship to work off of. I mean, they had over 100 years of scholarship that was already laid for them, that they had a really good understanding of. They had, tremendous scholarship to finally bring some resolution to the issue. So, when I look at the King James and being an Anglican, and obviously, having tremendous respect for the scholarship that was done, I feel like they were able to provide us with the best edition of the TR that had gone through, over 150 years of scholarship that preceded them.
No, that's really good. I mean, you Anglican guys, gave us the King James version,
Yes.
but then inadvertently you also gave us Westcott and Hort, and so we want on one stage we want to shake your hand, the other hand we're sort of holding it back to slap the Anglicans in the face in modern times. But yeah, and so can you explain to us like who the translators were? Like they were all affiliated with the Anglican Church, and so can you explain who they were? Were they like oftentimes people say, well, they were all Calvinists or they were all part of the Church of England? Can you explain who they were?
Yes, and I think more just as important of who they were is uh, the time period in when they were doing this scholarship, or to better understand the spirit of the times. If you look at the structure of the church, especially during the Reformation, it mirrors the polity that was set up in the very early church. It represented that system of government, especially when you talk about before the break. Obviously, after the Civil War in England, and then the recognition of groups that fell off from the Church of England, there was sort of this break in ancient Christendom, or the polity, or how the churches were set up and organized. And when we look at the Reformation for um, the committee members of the Church of England, they're part of that same structure, which has been since the beginning of the Christian churches. So, when we talk about the Anglican Church, and Dean Burgon mentions this too. So when he brings up, you know, the Greek Orthodox, the Catholic Church, and the Anglican Church as being sort of the only ones that should be involved in textual criticism, is they understood how the churches were set up and organized, and they understood how the churches um, were able to kind of set up um, the control and transfer for the text of the New Testament. So each of those members of the committee had that understanding that how the churches were organized, how they were governed, how uh, how the text was preserved down the line, and if you think about it, being endued with that knowledge, uh, they were able to look at the text in an entirely different way when approaching textual criticism. Jerome kind of shared that same type of understanding. He was around the ancient world. He was trained under Gregory Nazian. He visited Alexandria. He had a tremendous understanding of the church that were being preached and read in the churches. He was a historian, not to mention had tremendous documentation. And so when you look at the Anglican Communion and their committee, they were able to look at a much more holistic lens because after the Civil War in England, when we talk about apostolic succession or, really the polity of the churches, most of the groups that separated from the Church of England gave all that up. They kind of broke with the consensus of the fathers on a number of issues. They broke with that system of government, which is key to understanding, you know, how the text came down and what was the role of some of the witnesses and guardians in their preservation of that text. So, more importantly, of who they are and their level of education, which, and I think a lot would admit that, yeah, they were. Bart Ehrman admits that they were incredibly great scholars. But not only that, they understood how the ancient church worked, and with endued in that knowledge, they were able to better understand the received text. And I think we see this in some of the statements of Erasmus. Why, when he was able to look at just a kind of a sample of Vaticanus, he was able to identify very early on that this wasn't the text that was actually preached on at Constantinople and Antioch and some of the writings of the great fathers. And he made that observation, which is key because he understood that, the received texts of, the apostles would have been the ones that were being read inside the churches, and the bishops who were actually reading from the pulpit would be the best witnesses because they would have had access to those particular records. What they'd be reading from the pew is that what was received and handed down from the church. So, um, and I think that's where, because we can talk about the incredible accolades of someone like William Tyndale, even though he wasn't part of the committee, but that was the type of person that you were getting on the committee. But it was more of their understanding of how the ancient church worked, the polity that was set up to preserve and transfer the records down to future generations.
No, that's really good. And so the some of the names that get brought up in Textus Receptus circles are also Anglican, like Dean John William Burgon and Scrivener, and so what are your thoughts on these guys? Like, now obviously Scrivener, he was working with Westcott and Hort, and Westcott and Hort, they were also in the church, and so do you see that? These guys departed from that type of understanding that the King James translators had and a lot of people had in the Reformation period. What's your thoughts on what happened in 1881?
Well, and I've kind of talked about this a little bit in some of my debates. I think it's the first time that we saw the penetration of the German rationalism breaking its way into the church itself. I think one of the early discussions with Ehrman is this break with the empirical method and the introduction of postmodernism. One of the questions he asked me was, well, how do you explain the sort of modern day consensus on this position? And I kind of talked with Ehrman about this, and Goodacre is we saw a break with the empirical method and in change. So we go from the scientific method to the introduction of postmodernism, and these ideas start coming through. It's no surprise that we see this new understanding making its way in the German schools, and sort of the introduction of postmodernism with Kant. eventually breaching, the Church of England. And, with Westcott and Hort, you see the introduction of these ideas. Now, I think what we see with Scrivener and definitely with Burgon is obviously as, Anglicans, they understood the system. They also understood that text criticism was always part of the church, but they understood that it was always done off church texts. So they always understood that the basis for any, and they knew there was areas where they can possibly make some cleanup or issues that they did want to address. But even Bergen also understood that, the King James, it would never be replaced. And what their thought process was that there would be something maybe for scholars and above to look at or address, but it was never to come in and to replace it. And I think the most interesting thing about Scrivener, in obviously entertaining and looking into a lot of these issues, is that one of his last works, or his magnus opus, was a sort of re-engineering of the King James version into Greek. And it's interesting why a man that had collated texts was very understanding of some of the new texts and a lot of questions on some key passages, why this became his final work. And I believe this was a nod to the King James Committee that what they had done is something that we can't ever duplicate. So the Church of England always understood that church text criticism was always part of the history of the church. And we see that throughout with Jerome's, Vulgate. We see this with the Herculean. We see this in 1904 with the Greek Orthodox coming out with their patriarchal text. But they always understood that you were always going to use church text to do this. And with Westcott and Hort, this is where the break came when they started introducing texts of unknown provenance as the basis for the introduction of these new versions.
Yeah, and so you've heard of Gavin McGrath, haven't you,
Yes.
Jonathan? Yes, and so he's an Anglican here in Australia, and I often frequent his PDFs that he's put online. He's quite a good scholar. But I just wanted to ask, like, Bart Ehrman, like Westcott and Hort, they rejected the Byzantine text. And so Bart Ehrman, he seemed to make out that the Byzantine text didn't exist before the 400s or something like that. And I remember him saying that in the debate, and I was like, no, that's strange, because I've looked at Harry Sturz's work, and I know Dan Wallace was a Sturzian for like 10 years or something. And but yeah, the quote by Bart Ehrman that there was really no Byzantine text, and you were bringing up the works of like Dean John William Burgon, the 86,000 early church fathers quotations. So can you explain why that would be an erroneous a conclusion?
Yeah, and I was quite surprised. I don't think there was anyone that I don't think there was anyone listening to that debate bought in. Obviously, with the introduction of the Papyri that has Byzantium readings, it obviously falsifies that particular point. And Ehrman knows that quite well. I was quite surprised why he would hold to that. Obviously, yeah, there's the Bergen study, the 86,000 quotations that were shown. Obviously, you have a number of early references to these so-called Byzantium readings in Irenaeus and others that come well before the 4th century. So I was quite surprised. But if you think about it, the problem for Ehrman is where did these texts come from? And when they appealed to the 4th century, they felt like they had more of a mechanism or propaganda machine to kind of help push that textual narrative. Obviously, if the introduction of the Byzantium text form is you know being introduced to the Greek Orthodox churches at Antioch, and you have someone like Chrysostom that's able to advocate for this so-called text and have such a tremendous influence, obviously, when he goes over to Constantinople and the rest of the Greek Orthodox churches to make that their sort of standard edition. Um, it helps him in his narrative that, well, if there's readings before the 4th century, then this whole idea that there was this big push by the Greek Orthodox fathers to enshrine this text upon the Greek churches goes out the window, because if it existed in the 1st or 2nd or 3rd century, well, that's evidence to support that it could possibly go back to the beginning. So I think from a strategic perspective, Ehrman understood that. Obviously, and that's why he made a big push to say, well, we don't see it anywhere in the 2nd, 3rd, or early 4th century. You only see it when the churches kind of open up and you have, advocates to kind of help promote that text at Antioch, and then going over to Constantinople. So the existence of Byzantium readings in the 2nd and 3rd century, really opens up the possibility that this can go back to the beginning, and that was the form of the church text.
Because it seems like an impossible task for someone to sort of create a Byzantine text and go, here it is, guys, and give it to every church in the world, and for every church just to go, yeah, we're going to throw out our old text and we're going to replace it with this new one. And so can you talk a little bit about that, the impossibility of the Byzantine text just sort of like appearing in all the churches sort of suddenly in that era?
Yeah, when I opened up with Ehrman, the one thing I wanted to show is what we would expect to see if that was the case. And I brought in the Homeric epics because we have tremendous history dating all the way back to 6th century BC. Is what would the physical means, what would it actually take for it to actually happen? Obviously, the Archon of Athens having Pisistratus or someone of that nature, or a Constantine, or someone that actually had the power to affect that type of change upon the church, where you're able to introduce, a new form of the text. The problem with it is, first, the churches didn't agree on anything. They were fighting all over the place. We have an excellent example, with Jerome's Vulgate. The concern that caused with the introduction of that work being shared in the churches of North Africa. So, and it's very interesting when we look at, the changing of gourd to ivory in Jonah sparked an outlash. And when we look at the writings between Augustine and Jerome, they have been reading, they have been so used to the Septuagint, which has been a permanent fixture, and the people for generations upon generations have only heard it that way. So the change of one simple word sparked a riot, because, when we look at them, especially back in the ancient world, this thing of preserving the tradition that had been handed down was a very real was a very real thing in the ancient world. What had been handed down to the fathers is what they were going to stick to. This idea of change was against Um, I mean, it was opposite their culture. It's something that's been engrafted. And Augustine kind of mentioned that. He said, "Well, I understand what you're doing, and you're going to the Hebrew, and that makes a lot of sense. But this is the chaos that is ensuing as a result of that." And so,
Mm,
while Augustine may have agreed, so if you think about that, the change of one word, what would have been the impact? And the interesting thing that Augustine pointed out is it was the Greeks that especially who had heard the Septuagint from very early on were the ones that were denouncing it as a false translation and that the book should be condemned. It was an
mm,
outright lie. So how much more would we expect at Antioch for Chrysostom preaching on a new text that uh, was being introduced to them. How much more at
mm,
Constantinople?
mm,
So this idea that they were able to introduce a new form of the text without any type of response from the congregants. Uh, I mean, we know how many letters were being exchanged, not only from Augustine and Jerome, but Marcellus and Jerome were writing. People were going to visit Jerome. He had a team. So there was tremendous interest in what Jerome was doing. He was being attacked, he was being applauded. He had to defend his scholarship on, his basis for his underlying methodology. So anything that was going to happen in the Greek Orthodox Church would be representative of what we saw in the West, and we don't see that. And I think you know, you know, for a crime of this nature to be, we need some sort of event. There's markings of history which we would expect to see. We
mm,
know of the changes that the Homeric epics went through at the Library of Alexandria. We knew the scholars that had worked on them. We knew what it took Pisistratus to get it integrated into Greek society, how he had to bring all these poets to start and set up these celebrations to kind of even integrate it into society. So now, how do you get something like that into the liturgy of all these ancient churches that don't agree with each other? How do you, organize that uh, amongst all these churches without any sort of disruption? Um, and we don't see that. And I think that is the problem. We don't see the chaos that would have ensued if that was the case.
mm. No, that's really good, and I think very important for both people who are defending the Byzantine text or the majority text, and for Textus Receptus advocates. Um, and so, just going back to your own personal journey on how you became like an ecclesiastical text. I know some of these terms they don't fit completely. Some because someone else will just pop up and say, "Hey, I'm an ecclesiastical text guy as well," and you're like, it's like saying you're a Republican or Democrat. You usually
Yes.
have to nuance everything. But so your own personal journey and experiences that led you to a Textus Receptus position, what were they? And so were you, by the influence of your father, were you always of the persuasion that the TR was good, or did you go through a phase where you were sort of looking at different things, or?
Yeah, for me, it took me a while to first understand the issue, what was being said. Within the critical text community, the sort of ecclesiastical text position was, um, sort of an opening that there's all these textual traditions, and I think when I learned about Vala and what he was trying to do, it really opened me up to the perspective that there's all these other great traditions out there, and these are traditions that come from you know both witnesses and guardians of the church. So I understood very early on that you know we have these great textual traditions that have come down and served the people of God, very much, um, very much like the role the Septuagint played in the early Greek churches until Jerome, officially commissioned, an investigation into the Jewish canon and the writings from there. And I think, I look at that event and see what the Reformation was trying to do and take up this commission to go back to the earliest and best edition for the text. Both Erasmus and um, you know Cardinal Jimenez. They had their teams, to look into this issue, and I think that really opened me up to here's what they're trying to solve for. They're while the critical text community is saying they're doing the same thing, they're actually not. They've actually abandoned the church text for all these texts of unknown provenance. And I think that's the big thing because we're not against textual criticism. It's always been part of the history of the church. Question is, we've always used church texts.
Mm.
And so when I really started understanding it from that perspective, I really had the opportunity to really go through the scholarship and understand the history of the discussion on all these various issues. Seeing that Calvin, Luther, Beza, they all understood what the fathers said. They understood the debates on all these issues. They
Mm.
understood the issues with 1 John 5:7, the last 12 verses of Mark, the woman in adultery. They were in tune with these particular issues. So it wasn't like they didn't have the information that was available. They were very well aware. They were well read on Jerome. They understood his translation project, and now they are going in and recommitting themselves to understand and resolve these differences that, if you think about it, uh, you know, a lot of people are coming over into Europe from the Greeks. So they got a
Mm.
lot. Cardinal Jimenez had tremendous access to the Greek texts that were coming over from Constantinople after it was getting sacked. So you had this tremendous time of relearning, getting back into the ancient languages, studying church history, and I think they were in the best possible position to not only understand how the church was organized, how it worked back then, but they had tremendous information and scholarship at this time. They didn't
Mm.
have concordances. They knew the languages. I mean, they were incredibly bright, astute. They were well studied. I mean, when you look at people like Luther, Calvin, I mean, they were part of a patronage system back then that they only took the sort of youngest and brightest, and those are the ones that really had the opportunity. And these were the type of people, I mean, these were like heads of state. So they're
Mm.
not people like today, like James White or these Daniel Wallaces. They just sat at this school. These were heads of state
Mm.
uh, that were embarking on this investigation. I
Mm.
mean, Cardinal Jimenez. Uh, they had the support of the Pope at the time to. So they had tremendous resources. They had the support of that system to engage. So these weren't nobodies that were working on this. These
Mm.
were equivalents to, heads of state embarking on this study. So you had the best
Mm.
and the brightest working on these issues. They had the information. They had a better understanding of the ancient church than we do today, and uh, they basically reached this. They After all these independent investigations, they basically came to the same conclusions on these same passages. And when we look at that scholarship and we see how it kind of built up over time, um, you know, what is the scholarship we're going to accept on on some of these fundamental issues? And I don't think the work and scholarship that they produce could be duplicated today.
Mm.
And you know, whose word am I going to take?
Mm.
Theodore Beza on 16.5 or these guys from today? So, it's where does your scholarship rest on?
Mm.
And that's why, you know, I say, when it comes down to the King James, it's the best version of the TR. And that's where it sort of comes down to from that
Mm.
side for me. It was an opening to really understand. That's why when I hear some of the issues today, oh, they didn't have enough information, they didn't have the time. They knew all the debates. The same questions that are being raised today, they understood. They had a better understanding of how the ancient church worked. They had a very similar understanding of the type of documents that we see today, and they understood the fathers better than we do today.
Mm.
And they were able to better understand these issues, which put them in a better position to address these questions.
That is really good information. And so it seems that that generation of Valor, Aldous, Erasmus, they knew of Vaticanus, but it seems like they rejected it. Like the Complutensian polyglot guys, they had access to the Vatican Library, but they didn't
Yes.
seem to use Vaticanus. And Erasmus, he stayed with Bombasius for a while, and so he knew the guy, and then had Sepultiva give him a bunch of readings, but he rejected Vaticanus as well. And so it seems like the scholarship of that day, who we know, and Bart Ehrman will admit is much more superior. Like even the King James translators, he admits in a video that they were way more superior than most people in the academy today, and they're coming to these conclusions. And so it seems like they had they knew something that the academy doesn't really want to admit.
Yes, and I would agree to that. And this is why they try to change the narrative. So, oh, they didn't have the information. No, they did. They understood all these issues. And as you said before, Jimenez, he went to the Vatican to get the best. And while it was cataloged there, he did not use it. Obviously, he went to Venice. There's a lot of people coming in from Constantinople. That's where you want to go to the source
Mm.
of some of this information. But yeah, I think it comes down to the level of scholarship on this particular issue. They use church text, which is, been the key part of every other church commission. That the basis of their studies were on church texts. And this is where we see the abandonment with the critical texts. Is they've isolated themselves to a small minority of texts that can't be shown to have ever been used in a church. So
Mm.
the question that comes up is, if the question is to get us to the original text of the apostles, well, the question is, what tradition, if we're talking about the church tradition, does the minority of texts that you represent and support actually represent the texts that were actually used in the churches? And if
Mm.
the answer is I don't know, then you're already contaminating your sample and you
Mm.
don't have a good basis to go off of.
Mm.
So, from my perspective, is they still have to get through their sort of pretrial hearing of establishing this as a witness in any actual apostolic church. So, if you can't even show that these texts were part, we know of all these other groups and all these other texts outside the official communities. existed. They're well documented. We know about all these groups like the Monetists, the Novatians. We understood what they supported and what they didn't, and can help explain why these passages would not exist in some of
Mm,
their publications. It does boil down to they can't even get past basic evidentiary procedures of showing that the text that you support and represent was part of the official church. Because if not, what tradition are you representing with those? At
mm,
least from the Reformation position, the Vulgate and Byzantium text form were part of those official churches. So
mm,
they can ecclesiastically trace back the origin of that form of the text.
mm. And so, someone like Gavin McGrath, he sort of describes it like having three in the closed class of witnesses, where you have the Greek, you have the Latin, and you have the early church writers. So the Greek is primary, the Latin is something that sort of polishes the Greek, but then you're guided by the writings of the early church. So would you sort of agree with that estimation of Gavin McGrath, that would be the three sort of things that would be the primary things that we would look at?
Well, yeah, I would also say that the liturgy is key too, because that was actually what was officially read to the church. But we
Mm,
also have to look at that and also understand the politics in all these traditions. We know in the Greek Orthodox Church, you are not going to find much on Revelation being read in the liturgy because that was only to be read for private use. We know John was greatly attacked, his writings in the Eastern Church. So, whereas in the West, John was defended. So, we do have to look at that and understand that the sources of our information, where politics did come in to a lot of these debates, we understood that was a very real thing. We even see what Eusebius, some of his eschatology, maybe kind of influencing some of his positions and his historical writings. So I think understanding that we have the liturgies, we have the writings of the fathers, we know who presided over these churches. Um, you know, we have the ancient editions so that we know they were vetted. Augustine said he checked Jerome's gospel translation against Greek texts that he had. So we know that there was a lot of vetting um, in their process and where we can trust that this is coming from really good sources. So that really becomes our basis. So, yeah, uh, just a couple of minor points on what McGrath says. We have a lot of really good information to go off of.
mm. No, that's really helpful. And so it seems like people were following the text that had followed the church throughout history, and but at times the churches had to do a bit of textual criticism to sort of tidy up the natural things that creep in, like in any type of manuscript formation, that they can have variants. And so, but it seems like if you throw Vaticanus and Sinaiticus into that mix, it sort of pollutes the whole pot in a sense where you've got so many variants and so many differences that it creates chaos. And so, um, would that be the main problem with modern text criticism? Is they're based on these Vaticanus and Sinaiticus manuscripts, or is it actually a different methodology as well?
Yeah, and I think it's both.
Yeah.
The foundation of their issue is they've gotten off the church text. So they moved off the church text for texts of unknown provenance. So these textual traditions, you don't understand what tradition you're representing. There's
Mm,
the churches of the apostles, and you had all these other textual traditions that were out there. So I think first and foremost, they kind of landed into kind of fool's gold, but they can't really establish what tradition, they're making a very broad assumption, saying, "Well, these are church texts." Well, no, you have to establish that. We don't know the authors of these texts. We know Jerome's methodology. We know members of his team. We know who he was trained by. We know some of his biases. We don't have any of that information on any of these churches. We know we know the bishops that oversaw the Greek Orthodox Church. We know their theological differences. We know the history of those churches. Same thing with the Aramaic churches, but we don't have any information. So, from a foundation standpoint, we uh, we have a dirty test tube issue with them. Uh, they've tainted their sample, and they don't have much of a sample to begin with. Secondly, the problem that you would go to is methodology. It becomes very subjective. So when I talk about the introduction of postmodernism and the breakdown of the empirical method, we've kind of replaced the scientific method to postmodernism, or a very subjective view of their approach to textual criticism. So we have a number of these canons of criticisms that they use. That shorter reading is to be preferred. Or the reading that best explains the others.
Yeah.
It becomes very subjective in nature. There's not really an empirical framework to make these decisions. So it becomes in the eye of the beholder, and it's no reason why we have, 28 versions of these texts, and they're constantly changing. You have all these um, uh, different Bible publishing industries here, uh, you know, throughout that represent a sort of different. You have UBS, and then Kurt Allen, and they take these different, subjective methodologies, and you don't come up with anything consistent. And this is why every year or so you got to come up with a new edition. And as they introduce uh, more of these texts of unknown provenance, it just takes you down these different rabbit holes. And this is why I think uh, Dr. Ehrman is correct on this point, that looking at their texts, the texts that they have prioritized, you can't recreate anything. And unfortunately, you have the other side of the aisle with James White and Daniel Wallace, who says you can. So this is the problem that they have, is they take you down all these rabbit holes. These texts don't agree with each other, and you can't recreate anything. And you understand why Bart Ehrman holds such a strong position on this, because obviously he's trained by the father of a lot of these theories, and as a result of it, he came to a conclusion that you can't. And who am I going to believe? And I think that's where Ehrman is correct on looking at these texts. Obviously, it changes up quite a difference when you're looking at the Byzantium, when you're looking at the Vulgate, and you're looking at the Peshitta. You see a consistent DNA there between the traditions.
That's really good information. And so sometimes this show can go on for hours and hours and hours, for up to like 5 hours. But I understand that if you do have to have a break, or you have to go at any time, you call the shots here, Jonathan. You can just say, I've got to split. But if not, we can just continue and just go on. But it's totally up to you.
Oh yeah, no, I probably got another 23 minutes. So
okay. 23. And so just going on to the savior of the critical text is the CBGM, apparently. And so you are a textual analyst. Your dad's been involved with stats and computer statistics in his field. So as a textual analyst, or I've written textual analyst, but what sort of analyst would you label yourself as?
Yeah, so obviously I do tremendous amounts of data mining on
Mm,
millions of records, and obviously I'm looking at financials. We look at in the banking industry, we're looking at overdraft, we're looking at trends, lending data, forecasting. But it always starts with the source of your information, you know,
mm,
and where are your sources coming from? And so, as a data analyst, that's one of the biggest thing. Am I working with clean data? What problems do I have in my data? What similarities are there between the data points? And obviously, when you look at the CBGM, and I know this is as someone that writes SQL query language, it looks like a big sorting algorithm. and it,
mm,
and I know I'll probably be attacked for using that, but it looks like we're using ascending and descending sort patterns in the data. And so when you apply the CBGM, and I think probably one of the biggest breakthroughs of the CBGM is when you're dealing with statistics or any type of data analysis, you sort of need a base of data and create some empirical structures around understanding the data points. I think one of the biggest things was their whole narrative around text types. When you had to apply it to actual, uh, you know, statistical structures, really breaks down, and they realize that the only true form of text type is the Syrian Byzantium text form. That is like yes, because it has certain standards that it meets. There's
mm,
things last 12 verses of Mark, women in adultery. And it has these features that connect together, and these whole idea of an Alexandrian text form, a Caesarean, this this
mm,
whole made up terminology, because obviously uh, you want to try to understand the history of the evolution of the text. You kind of create this dynamic or history behind it. Here's where it came from. When you had to apply actual framework to it, it breaks down. There's no empirical basis for or historical basis for it. So in the CBHM, it was like the greatest gift that I know in my study. It was like the biggest admission that they were able to make, that this whole idea of text types or these forms coming together, and it was these different forms, and they created them all together, became BS.
mm,
It was imaginary. It was make believe. I know I referred
mm,
to it as the phony bologna sandwich in my animations, because but they've been eating on this for all these years,
mm,
and they keep telling us, and it was a way to create this narrative around the formation of the text, and then it all falls apart. So you would think, once this breakthrough happens, let's reconsider the viability of the ecclesiastical text. And they know, and this was what Hort's problem was too. And I think for every member of the critical text community, once you give up on that, there's only one way. I think this is one of the points that James Snap didn't like, is once you go back to the ecclesiastical text form, it only leads you to really one position. That's the TR.
mm,
That's where it really gets you to. And I think when we look at the Greek Orthodox Church and their own independent study in creating the patriarchal text, it basically comes up with the sort of majority TR type text when you do that independent analysis. And I think that's their biggest fear. So when you look at the CBGM, obviously they've given up. The one thing that was the basis for the history and formation of the text with the text types, and now they've created a sort of really cool sorting program, but not understanding. And even though they've kind of using the Syrian Byzantium text form in their analysis, they still don't really have any structure because they haven't cleaned their data. And this is the worst thing. Can you imagine me going to my executives? Well, where'd you get this data from? Well, I don't know, but we're using it in the analysis anyway because for some reason it's our fool's gold, and we're it. This is just the data we. No, you have to vet your sources, just like any data source, and every data source is going to have little issues, and we understand that. So when we kind of translate that over to variance, you're always going to have some differences in the number. I work with large credit card data systems, and even though we deal with the same information coming in the same sources, you're going to see the differences. But you do see the consistencies between them, the same trends, the same attributes like we see in the Syrian Byzantium text form. I see a lot of the same when I do my data analysis between our 4 different credit cards systems. Yeah, there's differences, volumes and counts may not always add up, but the same attributes, the same trends, right around the same variances. It's coming about the same thing. And there's a lot of unique stuff when I say like the last 12 verses of Mark or the woman in adultery, stuff we see in our data trends. There's consistent things that are consistent when we look at, you know, uh, uh, interchange rates or our purchase rates. We see a lot of those consistencies. So for them, the CBGM has been a blessing. I think it's a blessing for our TR advocates because we get to raise up the flag and says, hey, your whole understanding of the history and formation of the check, you have just come out and destroyed and said you have no basis anymore. So why aren't you going back to the ecclesiastical text? And the only reason I can really come up with because it brings them back to the TR, and that's why Hort was so against it. And if you think about it, he had to attack the Syrian Byzantium text form because that's where it leads you to. It only leads you in that direction, and that's why they were so dead against the TR. But in order to undermine the TR, you had to attack, Chrysostom in the 4th century. So you had to attack that text. You had to attack Jerome and his text. That was the only way to do it because those texts all lead you back to the TR. I think every independent study, starting with Valla, Erasmus, Cardinal Jimenez, Stephanus, all the way back up to Scrivener, points back to there. And for them, it's the position that they can never take. Having to reconsider the ecclesiastical text, they all become TR advocates if they do that. And unfortunately, there's no copyright on those versions, so there's no way to make money on this stuff. So so I can see why they continue what they do. They can't give up the UBS and Nestle Allen publishing companies or the William Tyndale. There's too much money, influence, industry in these. I mean, all these Bible editions. It's a huge industry. You're never going to end that.
And so you think there is a Bible industrial complex?
Yes. I mean, if you think about it, we haven't. I mean, with the change, with the introduction of these new texts, it's created an entire new publishing industry for Bibles all over the world. I mean, you have 3 major. I mean, you got Tyndale House, you got UBS, and you got Nestle Allen as the main ones. Not to mention all these other smaller groups. But if you look at them, it's tremendous industry. I think it's too late to go back for them. They're not going to come back and just say they're wrong, even though they don't have any empirical basis to support. There's just the industry has already taken off running. You can't rewind the clock and all that stuff. It's too much to give up.
That's interesting, and it seems Theodore Leadus talked a bit about that with the World Council of Churches and the influence on the Revised Standard Version, which I
Yes.
think the ESV sort of took the place of that.
Hmm.
Have you been quite influenced by Theodore Leadus's material?
Yes, we worked with him very early on,
Oh
so I got
wow!
to speak with him a number of times. We actually was working with him on some responses to James White because James White had attacked him very early on. So I know my dad talked with him. I got to share some communications with him, um, and we were working on sort of doing our ministry back then. Unfortunately, he passed away, but. That was a very early start with us working with Lettuce. And that's why I kind of referenced him very early on in some of our videos. And, he was very much a sort of ET proponent, ecclesiastical text proponent. Even as a Lutheran, he shared a lot of respect for the Anglican communion and a lot of their scholarship. So, um, I think from that standpoint, he's been an influence on my side as well. I think the fact that his teacher, um, you know, I think with Edward Hills and all, uh,
Mm.
he had tremendous background and insight, and I think speaking to him from an Anglican was able to kind of share. Where we sort of agree and disagree on certain points, but yeah, tremendous influence in our work as well.
Yeah, because he was a Lutheran. Is that
Yes,
right?
he was a Lutheran.
Yes, I think he actually was there. The formation of the Dean Burgon Society in 1979, but they rejected him because at the time he was a charismatic, and they
Yes.
said you can't join. But then after that, he became a Lutheran. But who else would be like your strong influences, or have you known anyone else like that in the textual community who you know personally? Or
Yeah, so Pickering, I got to talk
oh,
with
wow,
Pickering at the very beginning of my journey. We got to share some really good conversations, even though they were expensive. He was out there over in Brazil, so it was a big phone bill. But tremendous influence from him as well. But I would say the likes of yourself, getting to know you very on, Nick, and the site that you had. A lot of your research I was able to look through as well. It's been a really huge help. I would say James Snap. James has done some really excellent research, even though there's some differences we've had. I would say James Snap uh, has provided some really good research. I know in my debate with Richard Carrier, there was some really good stuff I was able to pull from him as well. I would say, uh, Stephen Boyce here in the local community. Um, there was a number of people very early on that kind of reached out, like yourselves, that was kind of instrumental, especially as I started articulating my thesis on some of these things. And to this day, I'm happy to hear Ninja Scribes and
Frankenstein text and
yeah, Frankenstein. I mean, Steve Avery. Um, Will, who's diehard King James fan. I love him to death. He has done some really excellent work. So even in the local community, Will and Stephen Avery, yourself, Nick, James Snap, Stephen Boyce. There's been a lot that I've been able to pick up, and even from people like Peter Gurry and others to
mm,
help understand their position. I've got to learn a lot from and really get to understand the difference. But I was very influenced by the ancient church and how they argued Irenaeus, Tertullian, Augustine, Jerome. I was very impressed with how they articulated their defense for the text, the canon. So I know they had a lot of influence in my arguments for articulating, and even Yeah, Jeff Riddle. I got to talk with Jeff Riddle quite a bit. I'm glad, Hudson, you brought him up. I got to talk with Jeff quite a few times. Really sharp. Shared some really good conversations. So a lot of these guys in the community, um, and I forget the other guy's name. He was a Presbyterian. He had died off many years ago. He was involved in the Texas community as well.
Or maybe Keith Mason, or
No,
no?
I forget his name, but he was out there doing a lot of really good stuff too. Obviously, D. Bergen, Scrivener, Hoskier, really big influence in understanding. But when I read them, I realized what they were saying as an Anglican, and it kind of goes back to how the church kind of argued very early in the ancient church.
No, that's really interesting. And so, what do you see as lacking in the Textus Receptus conversation today? Do you feel like, do you ever listen to people and go, oh, I really just wish they knew this, or that they'd study, do a deep dive into like early church fathers or something like that? Do you see something lacking?
Yes and no. I think we've done incredible research. I think when we look at the documentation that we were able to put together, the citations from the early church, a lot of the debates and the notes, um, I think we've done a really good job in collecting information around the discussions around these issues in the Reformation. And I think we've done a really good job of compiling a lot of really good data points where I think where we got to do better is how do we organize and how do we present our case. And the thing I say that's probably most lacking, the reformers understood because they were part of that sort of monarchy system or that form of government that existed in all the ancient churches. They understood how they were set up, organized, how they operated. They all understood the role of the clergy, from the bishops, deacons, the presbyters on down. They all understood that framework and how it provided a mechanism for the transfer, control, and custody of the text. And I feel that's probably where we're missing the argument. What was the historical means? Obviously, as Christians, we all understood. We all understand that there's two aspects. God obviously communicates, and we work by the spirit and the flesh, and that whole concept of both the human and the divine are at play in the transmission of the scriptures. And while I think we've done a really good job on understanding that God's hand has always been working, and I think we do a really good job on that, but also understanding the physical means by whereby God preserved his text through the churches. So I think that's where, when we look at the confessional, position, I think that's where we're lacking, and this is why I think why James White, Peter Gurry, and some others will take on some of those positions because they feel like they have an edge on that position because they are lacking, you know, the physical side of God's work. That we can see God's work physically. You know, uh, so I think that's the part that's probably the difference to the physical church. As a means to preserve and bring down his word for generations, has to be articulated more in our discussions. The actual means by which God preserved his divine word to bring it down to us.
Hmm. And so you've done a lot of debates. Do you have any debates lined up in the future, or you put that on the back burner?
No, I do. You know, um, I've done a lot of textual criticism. I've had some really good debates on Daniel, and uh, I feel like a lot of there's another one that I am pursuing on the Book of Daniel that I would like to do, and there is another one that I know myself and Rabbi Tovia are trying to do on uh, on was Jesus, the Messiah. So there is
Mm.
something I'm trying to work on with Rabbi Tovia on that particular issue on was Jesus the Messiah, and there are some other ones that I'm trying to work on. Now, I would love to do a debate on 1 John 5:7. If and I know I've been trying to get on something, with 5 kids, and I know I've been promising something on 1 John 5:7. For me, uh, I it has to work. It has to make sense, the animation, and it has to have a good story behind it. So there were some ideas that I had went with that was pursuing on the 1 John 5:7 animation that went into the the textual Frankenstein one. So I'm hoping eventually to do the 1 John 5:7. I think that's going to be my final animation. Once I do that one, I'll probably get with you, Nick, on some more scholarship. Uh, but I know I've asked James White, I've asked others in community to debate 1 John 5:7. I think um, I would think it would be make an excellent debate. I haven't had
Mm.
any real contenders in the community, and I really wanted someone from the academic community, like a Gurry or others,
Mm.
um, to really engage that question on, because I think it would be a fascinating discussion, taking all the great information. It's just how I think it needs to be articulated to really put them on the spot for that debate. But Dr. Peter Gurry or James White or Dan Wallace, I would love to have that debate. You feel like that's our weakest case? I would love to articulate how we can defend that one and why it should be in the Bible and not taken out.
Well, there we go. We've got a debate challenge there. And so if any critical text person is watching, or
Mark
if you,
Ward, if Mark Ward is watching, I'd definitely love to have that conversation with him.
yeah, that would be really good. And so we're just about to hit the 1.5 hour mark. If you have to go, I completely
Yes,
understand.
I see my wife waiting for me back in the corner with the kids for her
She's
break.
going like, cut. Or she's raising her fist at you. So yeah, you better run along.
Yeah, you're married, Nick, so you know how that goes.
Yeah, I've married a Pakistani woman.
Oh yes,
She's gorgeous. She's beautiful, but when she raises her fist, it's like, whoa, baby.
yes, I married a Mexican woman, so
Ooh,
they have a lot of passion. Great women, but a lot of passion too.
it's the spicy food. It
Yes,
gets them every time.
it does.
But yeah, so I've really enjoyed this. So we've got Dwayne Green's just jumped in. So I'll let you go, Jonathan, because I know you got a busy life. And but this
Let's
was a
see.
really good conversation. I
Oh,
really enjoyed this.
I could answer this question. Does Jonathan know if Bart? Well, I think Bart Ehrman knows the scholarship is against them in the set or the evidence. The evidence is against them on that the writings or that there isn't evidence Byzantium readings prior to the 4th century. I know he knows that the evidence is against them on there. I understand why he took the position that he did,
Hmm.
and I know he has answers to address why we may find or things may have been added in, and which explains that. But I think from his standpoint, he knows that the evidence is against him. I don't think he's changed his mind. He's kind of held firm on his narrative, just like he does on other things. So I don't think there's no changing his tune. He does understand that the evidence is against him on that point.
That's a very good answer. And so Mike Holner from Right Division. So Mike Holner and Mike Ferrando, they recently debated James Snap Jr. on 1 John 5.
I thought it was an excellent debate. I thought they did a really great job in there. So very excellent job on 1 John 5:7. Sorry, Snap. I wouldn't have taken that debate with them. So I know it was a really great job on there.
Yeah, really good, really good. So I've enjoyed this, Jonathan. It's great to finally talk like face to face, and we've known each other for quite a long time. And I really appreciate your work. I appreciate your demeanor. Your Christian testimony among the debate community is just outstanding. And so hopefully we'll see more of you in the limelight soon, and we'll see a few more of your little cartoons, your animations, I like to call them, seep out into the internet.
Yeah, I know I saw Dwayne Green on there. I know he talks with Ward and all these other guys. Let's get Dwayne, reach out to Gurry or Ward or others so we can get on Nick's show and actually do a debate on these issues. I always say, obviously they advocate and they make a lot of assumptions for their positions. The thing that I haven't really seen in their community is to go out and defend their thesis. Sometimes I wonder why they hide behind their seminaries and some of their scholarship. And I feel like, Nick, you've been on the front line for so long, and some of these others. Why don't they actually sit down with the other side and actually have these discussions with us?
Well, maybe we're a bit King James ugly, and you're a bit you're a nice guy, and so maybe they'll debate you, but they won't debate me.
Maybe, and I don't know if it's the Anglicanism in me but that would be great to kind of organize something with a Peterhead or a Gurry or a Ward, one of these guys that actually want to sit down and defend their thesis. They're professors. Sit down and actually defend your thesis. If Ehrman is willing to sit down with me across the table, Dr. Richard Carrier, all these PhD candidates, even a Tommy Wasserman, come sit down and let's have a discussion.
Well, there we go. We've got the invitation.
Mark Ward. Oh, thank you, Pastor Brett. One last thing I do want to say to everyone. Obviously, it's been a tremendous journey. This has made such a big influence on my dad. It made the last, talk about 8 years of his life enjoyable. But Nick, you've been a huge part of my success. With a lot of your research, reaching out to me early on, supporting what I was doing. So I can't really thank you enough. So you really share in this journey and this ministry of defending the word. And I feel like more of us have to do this and kind of work together. I know Michael Holmes, he reached out to me and others I've talked with. So I really love this community. And Nick, you've been doing amazing stuff. Your research and your scholarship has been outstanding. Sometimes I wish I could be Nick when I grow up. So as much as, I really enjoyed the conversations. I think having the support very early on from yourself, Nick, James Snap, if you're out there listening somewhere, I do thank you too for a lot of your support. Steve Avery, Will, and all the other guys that have been out there that kind of supported me in the very beginning. I just want to thank God that God has used all of us in ways to defend His text.
Oh, that's really good, Jonathan. And so, so that's great. I'm just going to throw up your YouTube page here. So if anyone wants to go to Jonathan Sheffield's YouTube, there's a whole bunch of really good debates and good topics that have been brought up. And so I'm going to continue on with this program, Jonathan. So if you want to show yourself out at any time, that's fine. But if you got any last words, you can say them, or if you've already said them, you can jump out, and we'll probably catch up maybe in the week sometime. I'll just have a bit of a chat on Messenger, and we can talk about maybe organizing a debate with someone.
Yes, no, that would be great. I know I told you very early on, 1 John 5:7, even though Holmes and then they did an excellent job
Yeah.
against Snap on there. Sorry, Snap. But yeah, I think organizing a debate with some of these. Thanks, Pastor Brett, for reaching out to Mark Ward. I think that would be a really great discussion. But thanks for everything. Sorry, Nick. Text came in. Me and my wife have been trying to find a house, and we've been competing and trying to get deals. And now it looks like 2 offers just came in that they're trying to go back and forth on the same house that we're trying to get. So please pray for us, everyone. Me and my wife have been looking for a home to raise our 2 little girls now, since the other 3 are on their way out. So just pray for us, pray for our ministry. I am working on a book as well that hopefully should be coming out in the next year. But other than that, I think, Nick, one of these days, me and you got to probably team up for one of these debates.
That'd be great.
You have some excellent scholarship. So if anyone wants to challenge me and Nick on 1 John 5:7 from the TR or from the critical text community, I'm open to that.
That's really great, Jonathan. And so I'll let you go and work out your housing situation, and we'll keep you in prayer. Thanks for all you're doing, and God bless you.
God bless. Thank you, everyone.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed that. That was great. And so I've just got Jonathan's YouTube up here. And so some of you might recognize these cartoons. So here we have, I'll just enlarge it a little bit. So here we have like Chrysostom, some scribe with the Peshitta. We've got Jerome with the Vulgate and Erasmus with the Textus Receptus. But here we have James White with Sinaiticus, Bart Ehrman. He doesn't hold anything in his hand. That's probably deliberate. And Vaticanus, with Dan Wallace. And so when you go through a lot of these videos, I mean, James White said that if you follow the Textus Receptus, you have no apologetic in the real world. Remember James White was saying this like years ago. So here we have someone like Jonathan Sheffield, who obviously knows his stuff. He has jumped into the real world, and he's debated on several different topics. Like there's a lot of this stuff is not just textual issues. So obviously with Bart Ehrman, we're debating on the text, but debating on Exodus, debating on did the disciples follow Jesus, with Dillahunty, with Carrie. Like these are some of the top names in the debate community, Bart Ehrman. And so James White, oftentimes he would hold up the flag. I've debated Bart Ehrman. Well, here we have Jonathan Sheffield saying the same thing. And sometimes it's funny. James White will hold up the Stephanus 1550. It's sort of like, well, I've got this, and perhaps the King James guys even use this, and so people get wooed over by that type of information. But people in the Textus Receptus community are holding up, oh, this is a text of Beza, and all this sort of stuff. But Sheffield has turned around and gone, well, I think we do have an apologetic in the real world, and he's debated all these guys. We've looked at the Book of Daniel, Apostolic Succession, debated Robert Price. Now, I listened to a lot of these debates leading up to this conversation. It was actually a few weeks ago. I jumped on to Jonathan Sheffield's page, and there were things on there I had no idea that he had done, because I guess, if it's not right in your face on Facebook, sometimes you can skip over what people are doing. And I thoroughly enjoyed going through these debates. So I recommend people do it. And also, one of the things is, when I interviewed Alan Stewart a few weeks ago, we looked at his memes, if you remember that. And these videos are quite good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play these animations back to back. So I might even do it later on today, or maybe tomorrow or something like that. And I'll just put this sort of like in a playlist and just play through them, because they are really well done. And some of them go for quite a long time. You watch some of them, they're whole debates. There was a debate between, the de facto debate between Bart Ehrman and Jonathan Sheffield. So he's 6 years ago worked out like a de facto debate. Here it is, 59 minutes of a debate between himself and Bart Ehrman. And then, a few years later, here he is, just 2 years ago debating Bart Ehrman. And so there's a lot of really good information there. So, and I really appreciate you guys with your questions. I don't think anything got missed, because Mike Holner, I think he was calling you Holler or something, Holmes. Yep. But that's cool. It's just a bit of a speaker there. Said, Brother Jonathan, love your animation teachings. I'll put this up here. When we talked in October of 2018, you said your epic 1 John 5:7 animation will be released soon. You're still going to release it. And so, like he said, this is sort of like on the back burner, and I understand you get busy and you've got, 6 or 7 different projects hanging in there. Sometimes you announce you're going to do something and it doesn't really work out. But let's keep Jonathan in prayer. Let's pray that, his house sale works out, and also just for his ministry, and that he can get some time to do this, because sometimes that's the thing. You can get really busy with life, and some really, really good scholarship. Oftentimes I'll talk to people and they're like, man, I'm working a full-time job and I've got kids and I'm in church, I'm busy. And so sometimes that can sap all your time, all your energy, just sort of keeping your head above water in all those situations. But we want to see Jonathan Sheffield out in the debate community. And you guys, it'd be great to contact people in the critical text community and say, hey, Jonathan Sheffield's put it out there to debate on 1 John 5:7, or, we've got TurretinFan and Peter Van Cleek. Now, I've fixed a date for this. I'm sort of just in the process of working out a date. I think it was the 13th of July. I've just got to double check this. And so I've got to make a bit of a graphic for it and put this online. But I'll just find our little conversation that we had here. Okay, getting lots and lots of notifications there. Peter Van Cleek. So we are looking at July 13th. So that's going to be about the same time. So I've just sort of made like 5 p.m. New York time, the time. And so that seems to just work with everyone. And so that's going to be TurretinFan and Peter Van Cleek. So if you don't know who Peter Van Cleek is, I'll just put him up here. So Peter Van Cleek, James White. Oops. Okay, it's on silent anyway, so you guys wouldn't have heard that. Yes, here we are, YouTube. So, oh yeah, I was watching this the other day. So this is Peter Van Cleek here, about to debate James White. And so he recently did a debate. So it says streamed a year ago. Textus Receptus is equal to the New Testament autographs, James White versus Dr. Peter Van Cleek. So this is, here is the thumbnail for that, which you might recognize. Okay, well, that's observations from Jeff Riddle. So Peter Van Cleek is in that type of community where, you know, he has a similar position to like Jeff Riddle and others in the confessional bibliology realm. So that's going to be very good. So TurretinFan, he has done a lot of debates on standing for truth, and he is a Calvinist. So he's friends with James White as well. So this will be a very good debate. So that is on the 13th. So I'm going to make up a graphic for that in the next day. I'll probably do it today if I get a little bit of time. I've got to run pretty soon, and so. But apart from that, what else have we got? So yeah, I'll just show you the Mike Holner. I might jump on Facebook. It might be easier. Mike Holner. Okay, that's not coming up. So I'll go to my chat here. Okay, Michael George, that's why it wasn't coming up. So we have this one coming up. King James Bible, 1 John 5:7, Textus Receptus, the Old Latin, Church Fathers, and more. Live audience questions. So this is going to be interactive. So this is not going to be on my channel. This is on Right the Vision Ministries channel. So this is Mike Holner here. So he's written the King James Only Debate. And we have Mike Ferrando. So he's written The Witness of God is Greater, a big a PDF that is describing the history of 1 John 5:7. And I've written about Revelation 16:5. So I've been invited on this program. So this is in 14 days on the 7th of July. And so that's at 9. So that's my time in Australia. So ignore that. But so, yeah, we've got that coming in 14 days. So that's coming up. And on Revelation 16:5, TurretinFan and myself, we're trying to work out whether to wait for the ECM to come in and look at the extra evidence on the book of Revelation, or if, you know, someone takes a few snapshots of that book and sends it to TurretinFan and says, hey, you know, here's pretty much all that it says on it. Then, and if it's a bit of a nothing burger, then we can sort of move on with the debate. But so TurretinFan is going to be debating Peter Van Cleek and then TurretinFan and myself on Revelation 16:5. And so we haven't settled the date. But James Snap Jr., so next weekend, so I'm going to be in Sydney. I'm going to be away, so it might be a quiet weekend. So I've got to fly down there. But James Snap Jr. is going to be debating Will Kinney on standing for truth. And so some of you guys might want to support that and look at that. So that'll be interesting. But I've organized for myself and James Snap to have a debate as well. So James Snap has sent Will Kinney a handful of readings in the King James that he sees are erroneous or don't have manuscript evidence and things like that. So obviously that's next week. So that will happen before anything myself and James Snap organize. But I've got a handful of different texts to look at, because me and Will sort of talked to James Snap and said, look, there's no point us having this exact same debate over the exact same things. We may as well debate on different things. And so that debate with James Snap and myself will be on this channel as well. And so there was another question by Matt Singleton. Hey, Matt, how you doing? and so I didn't get to ask this because of the time restraints. Is the Itala a consistent New Testament text? I've heard the line that it was chaotic and needed Jerome to reorganize it. So that's an interesting question, and maybe if Jonathan Sheffield listens to this, he might be able to answer that, or maybe someone can answer that in the comments down there. And so we've got a few live comments here. And so, yeah, Peter Van Cleek is great. Yeah, so it's going to be really good. I enjoy Peter Van Cleek. He's, some of these guys in the TR community, that they are guys who I aspire to be like. I'm like, man, I wish I knew this stuff. I wish I knew what, like Peter Van Cleek. If you go through his now, what I did, I sort of made a mistake in when I was interviewing him. I said, people need to go to Wisdom Gap. Now, there is a website called wisdomgap.org, which is run by him, but it doesn't really have that much information on it. The Wisdom Gap one was the one, it was a YouTube channel. Okay, so Wisdom Gap. I'll just type in click there and I should get to it. I'm pretty sure this is it. No, yeah, so this is the wrong one. So maybe I should type in Peter Van Cleek. Okay, so we've got debates. Yeah, now I remember Dwayne Green, he did an interview there. I've examined the debate. He's TR of choice. That's a great graphic. So anyway, there is a website there. Actually, it's in my subscriptions. So I can't remember exactly what it's called. Maybe one of you guys can remember. Maybe it is called Wisdom Gap, but it's just another form of it. Yeah, wisdomgap.org. Yeah, that seems, like the one. Maybe it is. That's why. Because I wasn't clicking on videos. Okay, so these are the latest ones. And so, yeah, these are lessons that you can go through. And it has been a while since I've gone on to these lessons. I guess even with my interview with Peter Van Cleek, it was quite a while ago. But he goes through the James White debate as well, so that will be interesting to go through. CBGM and Taylor DeSoto. So there's lots and lots he goes through here. So it is Wisdom Gap. So I'll put that into the chat there. And I encourage you guys to subscribe. He's got like 187 subscribers. So he's got nearly as many videos as he has subscribers. So that's like the whole effort of doing in like an hour-long video or whatever. It's like, he's getting 1 subscriber per video, which we want. We know that his stuff is so good. We want to sort of puff him up in a sense of, or get him in the algorithms of YouTube. So yeah, when you go specifically after the debate, I've listened to a lot of his stuff, and him and his father. So I'm pretty sure this is his father here. Yeah, these are the ones with the gnarly intro. And so this is his father, Peter Van Cleek Sr., and he's just as good. I'd love to interview him, actually. That would be really good. And so oftentimes these lessons are just gold. And so I would encourage, like when I was asking Jonathan Sheffield, is there anything lacking in the Textus Receptus community, and he spoke about a few things. Like, this is one of those channels where I'm like, if people can nail down what Peter Van Cleek Senior and Junior are talking about in these videos, I think their apologetic will be a lot stronger, and they'll be well grounded in certain truths. Okay, I've been Alan Stewart. Hudson, I've been listening to Peter Van Cleek and his dad explaining their books. Very good material. Wisdom Gap is the name of his YouTube channel. Okay, so that was 10 minutes ago. So I think we're on the same wavelength there, Alan. Hudson says we need to get an apocrypha debate to educate David Preston. Yeah, if anyone wants to debate David Preston. Now, someone said they would in the chat, and then David or Sir Carl Preston, he said, I want to know not their credentials, or their methodology on why they think Scripture is Scripture. And so I guess if someone wants to debate him, they've got to provide that to him, and then he'll debate them. And so he's offered to debate me. I'll debate him. I just probably need a bit of time to prep, because, for me, the Apocrypha is not something I've really focused upon. I've convinced myself personally that I'm not going to follow the readings of the Apocrypha, but to bring that into a public forum and explain that to everyone, it takes quite a bit of work. And so Hudson says, yes, thanks, Alan. I'm subscribed but have not watched any video, but plan to. Yeah, they're really good. They're really good. So Bob is in the house. There is the Wisdom Gap link there. I'm just wondering if there's anything else I need to talk about. I think that's about it. And so the next video that I'm going to do, I'm going to continue on with Mark Ward's New King James thing, because his latest video that came out, he released at exactly the same time I was doing a video on his New King James position. I want to address that. So I did 2 parts on his first video on the New King James. And so the first part is probably way better than the second part, because the second part, it's like we're just going through the weeds, and, these, was it Chuck Surrett, he's put him up on a pedestal and said he's the New King James guru. And I'm like, well, look, he might be a nice guy and all the rest of it, but I've never heard of him. So my position on the New King James has not been influenced by this guy whatsoever, but that's the type of thing that Mark Ward was bringing out, where we're all influenced by this guy. And so, but then he brought out this other video about the New King James, and it was quite, there was a lot of strange things in there. He's talking about numerology and King James onlyism, which most people in the TR community are just not really, it's not on their radar at all. So I want to talk about these things. And he was basically saying that if you say the King James Version has not followed the Textus Receptus in places, you're a liar. And I'm like, well, no, deal with the facts. I think he's lying. And one of the interesting conclusions that I came to was, you have James White making much ado about Scrivener's text being like a back translation from the King James and all this sort of stuff, where I've always said that no, it's not a back translation from the King James. It's the text of Beza, with there's about 20 differences between the 1598 of Beza and the King James. So, but that's enough to sort of warrant the King James, 20 different tiny little differences. All the rest of it's the same. 99.99% of it is the same. So between 99.99% and 99.98%, so the 99 would give you 14 changes. The 98%, 99.98% would give you 27 changes. Or was it 27 or 28 changes? I've got it written down. So I did the math. And so it is so close, 99.99, okay, or 99.98. So in between there, 20 translatable differences. Now, Scrivener made 190 differences to his Greek text, but the vast majority of them are untranslatable. And some of them are actually just mistakes. He just read something wrong and made a mistake. That happens. But so there's only 20 differences between the King James and Beezer. We're looking at departures from the New King James and the Textus Receptus. If I find 20, then someone like James White, he should really say that there's this huge difference, massive difference between the New King James and the Scrivener text, shouldn't he? Because he's making out that Beezer and the King James are so far apart. It's like a whole different text, and Scrivener had to translate the whole English Bible into Greek. So this is a narrative that goes around. And so while I was looking at this New King James issue, I thought, hang on, I know there's, I think I've picked up like about 6 or 7 places where there's departures from the Textus Receptus, but I do know where I can look to find these. And so it's going to be interesting. If I find like 20, then if we're going to use James White's argumentation, we are going to have this massive division between the New King James and the TR, and maybe what I'm going to do is do the work of Scrivener, and I'm going to actually back translate the New King James back into Greek. So all I'll do is I'll change those 20 places or delete those 20 places or whatever. And then it's like, we got a brand new TR on the scene sort of thing, just to show, how shallow their argumentation has been in the past. But so that's something that I'm pretty interested in doing. Now, it is only 9 o'clock here in Australia, and we are going to have our church service later on today. So I might actually even shut this down, because just talking about this whole Mark Ward thing, New King James, I sort of want to get it done. If I even just do like an hour or two on this, I think I'll be glad that I've done it, because I'm going to be really busy next week and I'm going to be hanging to do things. And so if I sort of cram it all in now, and I'm sort of in the mode, I've had a coffee, I'm full of the Holy Spirit and full of caffeine. And so, mate, once you got that mixed together, there's no stopping you. And so I think what I might do is I might shut all this down and reopen up another video, and we'll at least start the Mark Ward material going on his latest New King James video. So Jesus Loves You for all Eternity says, would someone give me an understanding of this channel? So basically we are defending the Textus Receptus, the King James version as well, which is an accurate rendition of the underlining Greek and Hebrew. But it's also my personal channel too. So at times I've got my own personal beliefs and things. And so I'm a pre-trib guy when it comes to eschatology. So I defend the rapture and stuff like that. And so some people mightn't groove on that. Other people do. But primarily I have this interest in Bible texts, and I've been involved with some Bible translation work. And so I like to talk about it. So what I'm doing is interviews with people who have had an impact on my life, and I've known in the community of the Textus Receptus, King James community. And so I'm interviewing those. So basically this is interviewing Jonathan Sheffield, who's done all these debates and videos here. So hopefully that answers your question. Hudson says, sorry, Nick, off topic. So Josh Peck's YouTube channel is called Daily Renegade. He did a video saying the 24 elders prove a pre-trib rapture, and his arguments for it are strong. Yes, that's really good information. And so it was interesting that even Matt First, who's one of the guys I'm critiquing as part of the new IFB sort of thing, even though he does seem separate from Anderson, he does seem to have a very similar eschatology. He had a good, strong argument that the 24 elders were the 12 apostles and the 12 from the representatives from the tribe of Israel. So, I used to bring up maybe 2 or 3 verses. I think he brought up like 5 or 6 verses, and some I hadn't thought of before. And so that was very helpful for me. And so it's always good when you're critiquing someone and then you're like, oh, I actually learned something from this guy. So that was great. And so I'm looking forward. I'll just type that in, Josh Peck. And it is Daily Renegade. Okay, so I'll leave that open. Yeah, so that looks like quite a popular podcast. Helg says, yes, please do that. So Helg is in Norway, so he's just like, man, I just want to stay up all night and listen to textual issue. I want to hear Mark Ward's voice again because I miss it. You know, when you talk to a loved one and you're like, I just want to hear your voice. I miss it. You're pining away to hear Mark Ward just say, which TR and you're a liar and all this sort of stuff. So we're going to have fun with that. Hudson says his arguments, his arguments are strong on the 24 Elders. Yeah, thanks for that, Hudson. And so, yeah, Jesus loves you for all eternity. I like your name and nice kitten. Alan Stewart, I second Helg's motion. So, we've got well, you guys are the weightiest guys, so you're a majority anyway. It's like Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. They override everything, the majority. So there you go. You guys have spoken, and I just have to obey it. It's my duty. So I'll shut this stream down, and I'll just get refreshed a little bit, and then probably in about like maybe 15 minutes, I'll have the Mark Ward thing ramped up, and we'll be going through that. So thanks, guys. God bless you. We need Textus Receptus. Helg, we have now great responsibility. Well, I did call you Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, so I don't know. That's a compliment. Iron Clay, Peck may be right, but I'm very leery of these people who try to peddle their books for profit. Thanks, Nick. Okay, God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next stream.